And we continue our conversation speaking about Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and Turkey. A panel moderated by Michael Rubin. Michael Rubin is the Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum and a Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, specializing in the Middle East, particularly Iran and Turkey. A former Pentagon official and Yale PhD, he has worked in conflict zones, advised the military, and authored books including Dancing with the Devil and Eternal Iran. Ioannis, Foivos, Georgakakis directs the Middle East and North Africa desk at Greece's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's a veteran diplomat with postings in Washington, Brussels, and Kazakhstan. Andrea, Petranyi, leads the MENA and Gulf Division at Cyprus's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She has held key diplomatic roles in Geneva, Washington, and at the Cyprus Presidential Diplomatic Office. Michael?
Okay. Well, I want to thank Foivos and Andrea for being here. We're going to stage this as a conversation, and so a moderator should be seen and not heard, and preferably not even be seen. So let's focus on Foivos and Andrea. As they say, I have a face made for radio. So with that, there's so much that we can talk about with regard to the Eastern Mediterranean. What I want to do is actually just throw a question out to both of you. You've both had service in the United States. You're both in your respective countries in charge of the Eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East region, in your respective foreign ministries. But there's so much going on militarily, diplomatically, and so forth. Let's start out this way. October 7th, 2023 is a date that many people in this room aren't going to forget. How did October 7th and what it meant diplomatically in terms of security, in terms of everything else that happened, impact your work and the strategic thinking, respectively, of Cyprus and Greece?
Well, I'll take it 5 weeks before October 7th and that horrific, brutal day. September 3rd, it was my first day of work as the new Middle East director in Cyprus. And it also happened to be the 10th, was it, trilateral summit between Cyprus, Greece, and Israel, which we hosted in Nicosia. And Prime Minister Netanyahu was there, and Prime Minister Mitsotakis as well. And we had so many things going on in the pipeline, on energy, on defense and security. And it was, a great day and very forward-looking. And lo and behold, 5 weeks later, a devastation that we woke up to. So there is a before and after, and I'll just pass it on to also Foivos to chime in as well.
So I can say the strategic thinking in Greece has not changed after. There are a lot of things to consider that have changed a lot the dynamics of the region. A lot of changes in Syria and Lebanon, towards a positive direction, I would say, broadly, although there are nuances, of course, we will discuss later. But the strategic orientation of thinking that Greece, Cyprus, Israel is the East-Med axis of a wider security architecture that goes from Europe through the Middle East and towards India, this strategic orientation has not changed at all.
Let me put it this way. Israel's biggest strategic concern right now, of course, is Iran looming in the background, but also the terrorism, Hamas, and what's happening with Turkey. When you're sitting in Athens and Nicosia, what are your biggest strategic concerns?
Not very different from what Israel's are, actually, especially Cyprus. We're so nestled into that region. Realistically, our closest stable democratic neighbor is Israel in proximity. So we have very, very similar profiles. And there is a reliance, a combined and commonalities of that reliance as well, which has, of course, been something that's not just put on paper and declarations and lip service, but actually tangible in terms of our bilateral alliance and dependability on each other. Precisely because when we look around our neighborhood, it's not such a comfortable, nice neighborhood. Yes, we have that European Union profile, but we're kind of anchored quite far away. And our closest European ally and friend and brother is Greece. But it's still, you know, we are somewhat away, and we try and, you know, grasp and latch onto you as well. So yes, so there's that, and that's why I think there is this very organic relationship that has been cultivated and deepened over the years.
This is why this trilateral relationship, and then which is also anchored with the US through the 3+1 format, just to make sure.
So what do you mean by 3+1?
Yes, exactly. I will. So 3+1 is the US joining the trilateral partnership between Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, which happened the first time in 2019 when the three leaders met in Jerusalem with then Secretary Pompeo. And then we have yet developed different working groups and partnership in energy, economics, and political dialogue. What I can say is that October 7 has somehow set this, it has a brake effect on this 3+1, which we think we are convinced that this partnership is even more necessary than it used to be pre-October 7. And this is why our three ministers, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, last week they sent a letter to Secretary Rubio precisely to reactivate the partnership, this scheme of cooperation, the 3+1 I was talking about, and have a meeting at foreign ministers level. And this partnership is about, of course, political dialogue. It is about counterterrorism. It is about energy, infrastructure. And of course, it's a partnership of values, because we are four countries with the same values and same interests at the same time. And this brings us to the 3+1 is not just an isolated game. After the India, Middle East, Europe corridor was pronounced a few weeks before October 7 in New Delhi, just before the trilateral summit that Andrea was mentioning. The 3+1 is the EastMed nexus to this IMEC, what I said, corridor, which is economic corridor, energy corridor, but it's a corridor of values that we all our countries share.
Okay, but let me be cynical for a second. We'll talk about pipelines and that sort of things later. It's really easy to talk about all these diplomatic arrangements. Mike Pompeo had kicked off the 3+1 during the tail end of the first Trump administration, but then Biden didn't have a 3+1 ministerial meeting. Secretary Marco Rubio has just sent a letter basically trying to revitalize this. At the same time, look, I've been dealing with stuff in Washington for 25 years, and I always see the maps of the various pipelines and trade agreements, only a fraction of which come to fruition. Let's just take the India-Middle East economic corridor for a second. What's the holdup there? I mean, this was announced in September 2023 at the G20 summit in New Delhi. Why exactly haven't we seen more progress on IMEC?
There are both practical problems in Israel, Jordan, bureaucratic problems.
Oh, okay. I'm going to interrupt because you're being too nice. Practical problems. My two colleagues are diplomats. Yeah. Practical problems could mean the Jordanian Truckers Union not wanting to allow rail travel of cargo through Jordan. And it could also mean that Israeli bureaucracy cutting off their nose to spite their face when it comes to lack of warehousing capability in Haifa. But go on, since you're diplomatic, I don't need to.
Yes, sure. This is one angle. The second angle, and this is more strategic and this is why we need to push it, of course, is October 7. So obviously, we have to be realistic. The main objective of Hamas for attacking Israel was to stop normalization with Saudi. And we have to frank, they have succeeded that so far. they may have lost so many commanders, may have been crushed militarily, but strategically they have managed to really put a break on the normalization with Saudi Arabia. So what we have to say is that Greece, Cyprus, we are developing relations strategic with Saudi at a very fast pace. And what we have been told by the leader of Saudi Arabia, is Mohammed bin Salman, is he really wants this normalization. He won't say so much in public, but he's adamant about this. But right now, under the current circumstances, he's not able to do it. So those are things that they will take time. They will take, it will take time, but we need, time is right now to prepare it and lay the ground, because I strongly believe that the situation will get better, and then we will be able to move the project forwards.
And if I may, not just that, but for us, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, so IMEC, as I prefer calling it by abbreviation.
I gave them a strict no acronym rule before we started, sorry.
For us, it's also an extension of the Abrahamic Accords, and a very natural one, because of course most, or if not all, the countries of the Abraham Accords will be involved. Now, also, I have to say that within our, the way we think about IMEC, we don't think of one corridor and one entry point, for example, into Europe. We find that the best way is to actually have a multi-nodal, as we say, thing. So we don't leave off countries, for example, Morocco, that it can also be combined and joined up into this corridor. And I think in that sense, geopolitics and commerce can combine. And I think that's actually the best way that these things can take off properly.
Let me press both of you, though. What message does it signal that today, I believe, the U.S. State Department announced that they were going to be closing the consulate at Thessaloniki?
So I can say that, as Andrea mentioned, there can be multiple entry points of IMEC to Europe. One possible entry point is France. It's the port of Marseille. Other entry points is Greece, and this could include possibly Thessaloniki or Volos. So having Thessaloniki, which is the second biggest port of Greece, as an entry point to such a big geopolitical project, which obviously is like a counter to the Belt and Road Initiative. So having the US close the consulate in a city that possibly would be the entry point to Europe, I have let you to judge if this is a wise choice.
And I'm going to pick on you a little bit more, Foivos. You had said in your statement describing the India-Middle East economic corridor and so forth, that circumstances won't allow in some expansions right now and some success. Circumstances won't allow. In many ways, we can talk about how circumstances won't allow when an arsonist starts and keeps starting fires. So let's talk Turkey. We have the India-Middle East economic corridor. We have the Great Sea Connector. We have the 3+1. But doesn't Turkey and its Blue Homeland Initiative constantly get in the way of this? What is Turkey doing? And instead of interrupting all the time, we can think of Turkey as an imperialist power. They're occupying they're occupying a third of Cyprus. They're occupying parts of Iraq and Syria. If they had their druthers, they'd be occupying parts of Armenia as well, but they prefer to do that by proxy with Azerbaijan. So in terms of this, and also, I'm sorry, we'd be remiss in talking Turkey if we didn't acknowledge that yesterday was the commemoration of the Pontic genocide, where the Ottoman Empire and Turkey, across the span of when the Ottoman Empire fell and Turkey was created, systematically executed or drove out the Greek population in Turkey. So I do want to acknowledge that so that this isn't going without acknowledgement. But when we talk Turkey, with regard to its blue homeland, with regard to its land imperialism, I'd love both of you, and this is partly directed at Andrea as the representative of an island nation, to talk about the maritime imperialism and the games Turkey is playing with its exclusive economic zones, what that means to both Greece and to Turkey.
Well, indeed, we've been at the brunt of some of those lovely games that Turkey has played in the past, where they've basically stopped drilling, for example, south of Cyprus, right, nowhere close to Turkey, that one could, theoretically claim, okay, it's close to them. So no. These are waters south of the island, in between Cyprus and Egypt, nowhere close to Turkey, and they've managed to be absolutely precocious and stop those drillings. When the Italians were doing it, they were a little less forthcoming about being obnoxious about it when, for example, Exxon was drilling and Chevron was drilling. So there is a slight difference, or Total, the French company. They seem to be very good at bullish behavior, but not against everyone.
Could I ask just a two-finger intervention for people that don't follow Cyprus closely? You're talking about drilling by the Italian firm Eni,
right,
by Exxon, by the French with Total and so forth. What exactly are people drilling for, and what's there?
Indeed, there's natural gas deposits, basically.
Marketable?
And decent quantities. Okay, it's not going to turn us into, for example, Qatar, since we've heard that quite a few times in the room today. But the largest exporter of natural gas, for example, no, we're not. But it is.
So wait, are you saying Cyprus isn't going to donate a plane? Sorry.
Not this time.
Sorry.
No.
Okay.
But yes, but I mean, just to also allow Foivos to jump in, because they've had their fair share of issues as well. There is natural gas, and we are, it's actually one of the things that we talk to Israel about a lot, but also Egypt. And because these natural gas reserves are actually kind of in combined waters. So this is something that, we've been mediating sometimes also between Israel and Egypt on these things, but actually, just to take it a step further and maybe go into a subject that we'll broach later, Lebanon. It's not, surprising maybe, or maybe it is, that, one day we have the Israeli energy minister in Cyprus, and the very next day it's the Lebanese counterpart. There's reasons for that, because I think there's, certain gas reserves as well there, and Cyprus often is the one that both countries talk to, so we can pass on those messages in between Beirut and Jerusalem.
So realization of the corridor. So the corridor has multiple projects. Part of this project is, and this is also in the framework of 2+1, is the electricity interconnection between Greece, Cyprus, and Israel, which the name goes by the name the Great Sea Interconnector. So this interconnector has both economic value and geopolitical value. So economically, it promotes transition to cleaner forms of energy, and geopolitically, it connects Israel with Europe, and also it could be part of the. It could connect through Europe with Saudi Arabia via Israel. Greece has an agreement with Saudi Arabia for an electricity link. Basically, it would go either through Israel or through Egypt. The willingness of all of us that it would go through Israel, and all of us, that includes Saudi Arabia. So this electricity projects indeed faces a number of geopolitical challenges to its materialization. And the biggest geopolitical challenge is our good neighbor, Turkey. The other, I will come back to that. This is just another example why.
But I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How does Turkey block this? For people that don't know the maps.
Yes. So basically, Turkey has signed 6 years ago a memorandum of understanding with Libya for the limitation of exclusive economic zone. This MOU is completely illegal because such agreement can be signed between neighboring countries. Turkey and Libya are not neighboring countries. It's geography. It's not. It's a fact.
So is it accurate to say that what Turkey and Libya are trying to do is create a maritime border that effectively blocks any cooperation between Israel and Greece and Italy, for example, by claiming that the interior waters are there?
It would be as if Greece signed such an agreement with Morocco, ignoring Italy, Algeria, Tunisia, everybody else.
Okay.
And this is very normal, and this is, I mean, we want to do the research. The Turks say, you know, you're entering the area that we have delimited with Libya. So if you're going to proceed, we have to give you the permits. We have to allow it. And obviously we cannot ask for that because this legitimizes the Turkish claim. So on this project, this is just an example, and this is the whole Turkish-Libyan MOU, because until, let's say, 2015-16, Turkey had certain claims of Greece, Cyprus, but it had not gone so far until Libya. They have expanded they have a doctrine which is named Blue Homeland that expands their claims basically in the whole Mediterranean, saying that for all major economic project, energy projects in the Mediterranean, we have a veto power. We have to allow it. So the Great Sea Interconnector is a good example that we would like a more active U.S. involvement in countering the geopolitical risk. Also because, as I said, of course, it's very important for Cyprus, which is the only country in the EU that has an electricity connection with any other country. And also, it's very beneficial for Israel. It breaks the isolation because it links it with Europe.
So, Andrea, first of all, based on what Andrea said, one name to keep in mind for the future with all these various belligerents always coming to Cyprus to meet and pass messages, I'll go out and put my neck out and say that everyone should know the name Konstantinos Kambos, the foreign minister of Cyprus, because today you might know him as the foreign minister of Cyprus. It would not surprise me if I were a betting man to know him as a future Nobel Peace Prize winner. But I'll just put that out there. Now, and I may be going out on a limb, but it's important to remember that name and understand small state diplomacy. But if I understand what Foivos just said, Cyprus is the only state without actually having electrical connections to a broader grid. So what you're saying is that Turkey, with, for lack of a better word, maritime imperialism, my words, not yours, because I'm not a diplomat, is trying to isolate Cyprus and perhaps even strangle Cyprus and keep it from becoming a full-fledged, it is a full-fledged member of the European Union, but a completely sort of energy secure member. Is that correct?
You said it better than I could. Indeed, that is the case. It wants to deny us that very basic right as an EU member state to be connected to the European grid. But I would also say that, one could also maybe think about and project that to a different, part of the geography, which is maybe even not allow Israel and Cyprus to have that link. It doesn't take much to imagine such scenarios as well. I mean, I would never think that they would effectively provoke Israel in that manner, but you can't put it past them sometimes.
Well, let me reframe this. We had a panel today on Syria, and perhaps one thing that needs to be emphasized from the developments in Syria is how Syria has become part of a greater Turkish zone of influence, at least in the Turkish mind. We'll see whether it sticks that way. But to just draw linkages between our panels, in the Syria panel, we were talking about how Turkey's trying to craft a zone of influence in Syria. If we had an Iraq panel, we could say the same thing about Iraq. But what you're saying is, as the Eastern Mediterranean is becoming more energy important and militarily important for Europe, especially as it tries to free itself from Russia and Iran, for the United States, for Israel, Turkey at the same time is trying to create a zone of influence there with regard to certain parts of Libya, with regard to Syria, with regard to the occupied portion of northern Cyprus. Is that fair to say?
I think so, very much indeed. And I mean, we also have some indications that they would really like to pressure, the current powers that be in Damascus to, for example, sign a maritime exclusive economic zone agreement. And that would be very interesting what kind of maps the Turks have in their heads. I don't think the Syrians would go along with it because I think it would actually encroach on their own exclusive economic zone. But there are indications.
Well, let me turn this then. I mean, as Greg Roman, the executive director, has said, we're not just a think tank, we're a do tank. And so one of the issues isn't simply to analyze, but to impact policy. And one of the ways we impact policy through the influence that Jim Hansen and others have is to try to craft American strategy in a way where we can be responsive and proactive. If Turkey is trying to do this, if everyone recognizes that Turkey is trying to do this, and in fact, it's behaving like a malign actor at times, again, my word, not yours, what should the United States, if you had you're representing Cyprus and Greece, but if the United States could be more proactive, given this letter which Secretary Marco Rubio has sent trying to revive some of the 3+1 dealings and so forth, militarily, what should our partnership look like with Cyprus, with Greece? And for those of you that don't follow the Eastern Mediterranean closely, why don't we actually start with militarily? What is the United States doing with Cyprus right now and with Greece? From Alexandropoli to Cyclops and so forth.
Excuse me, we will answer this question, but for the US policy, we have seen that when the US has decided to be very determined in some of the issues of the Eastern Mediterranean, that has yielded result. When they have been more hesitant to act, this has given Turkey more fuel for that. I mentioned the Great Sea Interconnector previously as an example of lack of a lot of US engagement to somehow give a message to Turkey to stop messing with the project. By contrast, the Turkish-Libyan memorandum, which I describe later, although it's a thorn, it has not been implemented, basically. It's, for the time being, it's empty. So in south of Crete, and when south of Crete lies Libya, okay? So in between, we have given tenders for exploitation, natural gas exploitation for two major US companies, which include Exxon and Chevron. So there is strong backing from the US on this, and Turkey has not opened its mouth at all. Libya has sent some protests, but this is very weak. So they sent the protests, we responded, and that's fine.
Again, I'm going to press you though. Crete isn't just important for that. Why else is Crete important to the United States?
Because of Suda.
What's Suda?
Suda is basically...
it's our only naval base in the Mediterranean.
Yes, exactly. So it's it's critical for all the military, it's for the CENTCOM, it's for all the US operations in the Middle East. It's a very crucial
So
point.
From a Washington perspective, I'm sorry to press you on this, we have a situation where a supposed NATO ally in fact, it's a Trojan horse, but a NATO ally is trying to craft a deal with Islamists in Libya that would not only impact Greece and Cyprus economically, it would interfere with the ability of the United States to operate militarily throughout the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yes.
Yeah.
So so Suda is a very, it has not been, they have not contested Suda, of course.
Okay.
They cannot, they will not do it. So that's why when there is a strong U.S. determination, they don't touch it because they know where to hit. As I said, the U.S. determination to preserve these tenders south of Crete, and the messages it gave to Turkey have been very helpful. It has not been the same with GSI. And because you mentioned Syria, Syria is a very interesting example because how policy-wise, how we will act is, from the one hand, we want to help Syria recover. We want refugees to go back to their places. We want, it's our neighbor, Cyprus even closer. So we want Syria to prosper, all Syria to prosper. So President Trump announced lifting of sanctions 1 week ago. So he put some conditions, particularly on the foreign fighters withdrawal. And this is something that we need U.S. to really follow up, deliver, and a prosperous Syria without sanctions and without foreign fighters being able to terrorize minorities, it would be for us.
But you're short selling Greece, if I may, and I'm going to put it this way: Turkey, just down a few blocks away, President Erdogan can call Trump in the White House, and what he's going to say is, Turkey is the second largest army in NATO. Now, never mind that it doesn't matter how big your army is, it matters how you use it. If on a NATO mission you only donate 50 people, you're not that important. Trump is always harping on the Europeans about not paying enough for defense, for not contributing enough to security. Where does Greece stand on this?
We have, Greece is one of the countries that spends more on the military.
More than 3%.
More than 3%. So we are the top 3.
And what about Greece is a maritime power, and so is Cyprus.
We are contributing to the Red Sea.
So the Red Sea,
yes, so
the Greek Navy is...
Okay, so the Houthis are attacking maritime security in the Red Sea. So we have sent a frigate there, which is permanent and protecting ships, basically, accompanying ships, so that they can safely go through Suez. Okay. And, so we are giving.
I would even go so far as argue it's not the size of the army that matters. It's how
what
you
give.
Use your military, and
yes.
by those standards, Greece is punching far above its weight and far above.
And the other thing we are doing is that following the Iranian attack against the Saudis, we have given one Patriot missile battery to Saudi Arabia, so that they can defend themselves in case Iran decides to do some stupid thing again.
Okay, but it's not as if Cyprus is just sitting here singing Kumbaya as Greece expends on its military and contributes to security. So while you guys start writing down your questions for collection that we can ask the panelists, what's Cyprus doing in terms of our security, from airport security to maritime security and much more?
Indeed. In cooperation with the United States, we have set up what has been very, and this is an abbreviation, Cyclops, which is basically a training center on border control, counterterrorism. And its aim is to train individuals, officers from various countries of the Middle East with the highest, software and hardware on border management, terrorism, chemical weapons, biological weapons, even nuclear weapons detection. And we've had, I think, over 20 countries that have come to Cyprus for this training. And with the help, again, of the United States, now we're doing actually a program to try and strengthen the Lebanese armed forces. So they can actually start properly cracking down, which is absolutely necessary because of Hezbollah, and not just. So that's one major thing that we're doing. But we're also in talks and have started with the United States in terms of like having a humanitarian bay hub in Cyprus, because what we have seen and have seen time and time again is Cyprus is the place where US citizens evacuate in terms of crises in the Eastern Mediterranean, right? It's also where, you know, if we're going to be sending humanitarian aid, it's usually the place which is chosen by the United States to partner to do that kind of thing. So we're there as a facilitator in many ways, using soft power, not hard, but precisely to kind of complement, you know, other policy actions.
And if I may, just before we start turning to these questions, I want to just turn back to Cyclops for a second. This past November, one of the Middle East Forum's partners, the Hellenic American Leadership Council, arranged for me to have a tour of Cyclops and to understand what this facility is like. If you're just looking on the beach in Cyclops, you might not know it's there, but up on a hill is this facility where you can make mock-ups of container ships and in pitch dark, train militaries to go through to find the hidden chemical weapons, to find the hidden terrorists in different configurations. They can ensure that if someone is coming through an airport in Beirut or in Sana'a, Yemen, or what have you, with smuggled chemical weapons or biological weapons, not only will you be able to discover those, but you're going to be able to discover them quickly and safely so that you don't contaminate the whole airport in doing so, because we all know that not everyone has the same standards. Why Cyprus is so important is it's an island. If you're bringing a bunch of Libyans or Lebanese or Afghans or what have you to the United States, some of them might disappear tomorrow or claim asylum or what have you. If you want to claim asylum on Cyprus, you're stuck on an island. And that works in Cyprus's favor, which is why they've never lost anybody. And I should say that the Israelis also do training here. And on top of it, to sing your praises, because as a diplomat, you're not. When it came to the Gaza humanitarian pier, whether you think that was a good policy or not a good policy, the only place that the Israelis trusted to do the screening was Cyclops and Cyprus. That the screening would be done there, and then the goods would be shuttled to the pier because they knew that nothing was going to be snuck through Cypriot security or get into the chain after it had passed through Cypriot security. So this is where the United States, on very short order, is able to rely on countries like Cyprus and Greece. As I review these questions, before asking one more question for you, Andrea, your president launched a major initiative at the end of last year, appointing a special representative for the protection of Middle East Christians. How's that initiative being applied in the new Syria?
So she's my boss, by the way, and actually the two of us worked on also the humanitarian corridor, and we're in Israel about 3 weeks after October 7th. So just as an aside, but we started off in Israel before we kind of toured the region, etc. Regarding her other hat, which is this one, she was in Damascus very early January, speaking to representatives of the whole very rich mosaic of Syria. and getting their feedback on how they're assessing the situation in Damascus, how they view the future, what their hopes are for the future of Syria. And so we had a very good overview and understanding of also what was about to come. So we already had those sighs of, oh goodness, there could be a massacre. Lo and behold, we had it in March. Lo and behold, we almost had a full-scale one a few weeks later as well with the Druze. So, we got in touch, we have those links, and I think those links are really important to build on, because I think in that sense we give voice to communities that were in so many ways voiceless. And we are able to pass on messages and also try and convince Brussels, which, as the EU, that is our, supposed home and capital, to be mindful of things. Because I think sometimes European capitals are a little blind or not so concerned about what is happening in the Middle East. And we're trying to kind of, make them focus on that. In fact, Cyprus actually has the EU presidency coming up in a few months' time, January 1st, and that's our foreign policy priority of like, hello, the Middle East, you should look at it.
And I should say, Cyprus has the EU presidency coming up. Greece sits on the UN Security Council, and Greece has taken a lead not only in the areas we talk about today, but also, for example, on Northeast Asia, North Korea, where it's become the trusted interlocutor. Again, small state diplomacy. Let me turn to some of the questions from the audience, and this is both to you, Foivos, and to Andrea. How important would more Italian involvement be in the Greece-Israel-Cyprus triangle and in keeping Turkey and Libya in check? Of course, Italy has a long history with Libya. Is Italy even interested?
Italy is a very interesting partner. Italy has very close strategic ties with Turkey as well. At the same time, it's economically, it's a big industrial nation next to Greece. So, for instance, what we want for is electricity interconnection. We are talking about from Cyprus, Israel. Another interconnection I have not mentioned yet is the one we're planning with Egypt. It's direct Egypt-Greece interconnection. So all this electricity we will be getting, it will not stay in Greece. So part of it will go towards Eastern Europe, but a big part of it will go to Italy, where we already have electricity interconnection, and we are going to expand it. There was a visit by our Prime Minister to Italy a few days ago, and they have discussed this extensively. So extending the electricity connection with Italy is key to also developing this East Mediterranean partnership, because it's a big market.
Okay, and just for why it matters, because we can get into the details, the more that there's interconnection between Egypt, Israel, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, the more that electricity, hydrogen in the future, which Cyprus is involved in, and so forth, can go both ways, the more independent Europe becomes from Russia, Iran, and for that matter, Turkey. So when we're talking about all these connections and what Turkey is trying to do to stop it, one of the reasons why Turkey is trying to stop these sorts of things is because it stops the Turkish monopoly, the Turkish ability to blackmail, and we didn't need to necessarily worry about that when Turkey wasn't an Islamist power. But now that Turkey is becoming an Islamist power, perhaps it's just as dangerous to trust Turkey now as it was to trust Russia in the past or Iran in the past and present. Another question, and feel free, of course, Andrea, to comment about Italy as well, but this one's made for you. What is the biggest obstacle to a final peace agreement in Cyprus? Is peace possible or even likely in the next 10 years?
I think the talking point should be, as a Cypriot diplomat, of course, absolutely, yes, 100%. Because as a Cypriot, I want the reunification of my country. My family hails from, what is the Turkish-occupied part. So we have property there, which we can't visit, we can't see, we can't enjoy. And of course, my mother has dreams of going back. Whether she will return in her lifetime, however, on a personal basis, I think the answer is, I don't think so. And it breaks my heart to say that. But I think one needs to be a pragmatist that as things stand now, I don't know what the incentive would be for Turkey to be at the table and say yes. There is actually currently an effort underway, and we're really trying to be optimistic and constructive to allow for that reunification. But of course, that reunification does come with certain caveats. We don't want Turkey to dictate our foreign policy. We don't want Cyprus to become little Turkey in the European Union in Brussels. That would be disastrous. And I think, to be fair, a lot of Europeans don't want that either. But they just, quite frankly, hide behind us, hide behind Greece. We're the spoilers at the table when, quite frankly, I think some of them want Turkey even less than we do. But unfortunately, I want to be optimistic. You never know, things might change radically. There might be, theoretically, Cyprus should be the low-hanging fruit for Turkish foreign policy in terms of reunification. It's the easy one. They spend so much money on this occupation, which, by the way, their economy is just, in the pits in terms of how bad it is. They could be saving a lot of money. They could be doing so much with other issues that they're so involved in. Leave Cyprus alone, theoretically. But, that is a bit of a kumbaya, la-la land world.
Okay, let me give the anti-kumbaya answer from an American policy perspective about why this is important. First of all, if you want to recognize the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, go ahead and also recognize the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. That's point number one. Point number two, when you have Cyprus in the European Union and you have Turkey occupying a portion of it, and this isn't an issue with Turkish Cypriots because they're a minority in the occupied zone. Turkey has flooded the region with Turkish citizens that don't have origins in Cyprus. And this is why we have now in northern Cyprus, the occupied portion, protests by native Turkish Cypriots against wearing the hijab and so forth. Turkey's trying to impose an identity in this northern region. But that's all, we can say that's human rights and so forth. You've heard me give statistics from Turkey's own interior ministry about how since Erdogan came to power, the murder rate of women inside Turkey has gone up 1,400%. It's a cultural issue when it comes to religious impunity and so forth. Why is this important to the United States? Northern Cyprus, the occupied zone, has become a hub of money laundering. If you want to understand what Northern Cyprus is to the European Union and to the West, understand what the Northwest Frontier Province has been towards Pakistan, or for that matter, towards Afghanistan in the run-up to 9/11. And when you talk to Northern Cypriot school teachers, some of them will report that more than half their students do not speak Turkish, let alone Greek. They only speak Farsi or Arabic. And when you look at the casinos, a dozen or more casinos in northern Cyprus, these have become money laundering hubs for the Turkish army and whatever off-books operations in Armenia, in Iraq, in the Kurdish areas and so forth that the Turkish army wants to run. So you have this situation there, which everyone acknowledges is a problem, in which you have Hezbollah in the past regrouping, trying to plan their operations against synagogues and the Israeli embassy in unoccupied Cyprus, let alone the rest of the European Union. This is why it becomes important. So I just want to drag us out of the, sometimes again in the policy world, we count the trees and we forget that the forest, we need to enunciate it. There was one other question that I had, which was in the future. Let's talk about, I mean, we've been a little bit optimistic, pessimistic about the present. But in the future, you have this India trade. Could it come to one day involve a port in Gaza instead of just in Haifa? Could we see a panel here in the future that would involve Turks that are like-minded, wanting to live at peace with their neighbors, along with themselves? I mean, do we have any reason for optimism? Maybe not in reunification of Cyprus in the near term, but in a post-Erdogan future, is there reason to be optimistic?
We have to be optimistic. So we, Greeks and Turks, on a people-to-people basis, have excellent relationship. In all the postings I had in my life, I had great relations with Turkish colleagues even. We have visited Turkey. Turks have, in my wedding, I had Turks in Crete. So this is, there is ground for optimism about that. So the integration in the region is bound to create prosperity. You mentioned it could be a panel through Gaza. Of course, this is something, and of course we strongly believe that in the future of Palestinians having been de-radicalized, Palestinians have been taught to be that they have to live next to Israel. Obviously, there is a future to be there, and we have to believe it. We cannot circumvent geography. Yeah. So we believe in it.
Andrea?
Well, I just wanted to say that there is such a thing which has been kind of lying dormant for a while, which is called the East Med Gas Forum, right? So we're actually talking about countries that all have a bit of gas here and there, you know, and there is this forum, which, by the way, Israel's part of, Cyprus is part of, Greece is part of. Guess who else is part of, aside from Egypt? Lebanon. And the Palestinians as well. So it's one regional forum where actually everybody is around the table. Now, nothing's really being talked at, but what is also, which is very interesting, and it's linked with our first kind of comment about the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, a lot of people are now remembering this forum, and they're talking about reviving this forum. And as part of the IMEC, you know, because it makes sense. Our gas, you know, the gas fields are unified. We need to talk to each other in terms of how to extract that gas, how we get that gas on board into our countries, etc. So there is hope. Right,
and I'm glad you actually brought that up. And as I thank the speakers, I want to point out that even after October 7th, the East Med Gas Forum was the only forum where the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority really continued to work technocratically and professionally against the backdrop of everything else, to the point where some people actually make analogies between, what was it, the coal and steel forum in way back when that became the route for European Union integration. But with that, I'd like to ask for a big round of applause for Andrea.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our speakers.